Color is such a large part of our design universe. There are so many things that, because they are a different color, change how we react to and interact with them. Imagine, the cake that somebody baked for your birthday, and they added just a little bit too much red food coloring, and suddenly the frosting looks blood red, and now it's completely unappetizing to you. Color changes so much of what we do, so it's important that we're thoughtful and intentional about it. The first thing that we need to tackle is some vocabulary for how to talk about colors. And one way to do that is to use something called the color wheel. This is something that's been used for hundreds of years, and it's just a representation of the different types of colors. Color is a continuous spectrum of visible light to the human eye. And it's also important to note that human eyes don't see all the light and all of the color that exists. But we divide colors up along this continuous spectrum into a certain amount of categories. If we have a rainbow, we have a Roy G. Biv, we have 7 colors. The color wheel helps us think through relationships between colors. We start with the primary colors, and these are the primary colors of pigment, of creating colors out of paints, of yellow, red, and blue. And you'll see them over there on the color wheel at the sort of top, and then the sort of 1/3 and 2/3 marks going around. Between those, by mixing those colors together, we get secondary colors of green, orange, and purple. And then between the secondary and the primary colors, we get tertiary colors. And usually these are just sort of mashes of the two colors. So you get blue, purple, or yellow, orange. These primary, secondary, and tertiary colors are important to note because they help us as we ultimately create color pairings through some color theory. The other thing to note about the color wheel and some more vocabulary for colors is that on the color wheel we have hues. Hues are sort of the essence of that color. They are the most color of that color. You'll notice that the red on this color wheel, that's super red, right? So the hue is the color. A tint is adding white to the hue. So the hue, if you add some white to it and make it a little bit lighter, that is a tint. Shade is the opposite. If you take the hue and add some black to it, that is a shade of that color. So we can talk about tints of red and shades of red. Another important color term to know is saturation. Saturation is something that is very, very important, especially for digitally editing photos. Photos that look saturated look like they have so much color to them. What it actually means is saturation is how close the range of colors is to the hue. What I mean by this is if we have, for example, a picture of a landscape, and it's all sorts of different types of forest greens and some very bright greens and some not so bright greens. By increasing the saturation, what we are going to do is across the range of greens, we are going to push them all a little bit closer to that sort of perfect hue of green, that really green. We're going to push all of these colors closer to that. So actually it is a narrowing of the range of colors in an image, but it is an increasing of how much of the hue, the most sort of primary essence of that color exists in that picture. Another thing that we need to go through is the associations that people have with colors. This is important because when we're designing with color, it's important to be intentional about what we want to communicate to our audience. And color is really, really tricky for many reasons. We can't account for people's predilections and colors that they do and don't like. I mean, we all have favorite colors, and we all have colors we don't like. There are some people who just hate yellow, and whatever you do, if you put it in yellow, they are not going to like it. So we can't account for all that, but we can try to be intentional in some ways. Individual colors do have a range of associations. So for example, if I'm going to be talking about solar energy, I might want to use yellow and green in my design language in order to, reinforce that we're talking about green energy and we're talking about the sun. Similarly, if I wanted to create an infographic about the ocean, I would probably set a lot of things in blue because it's associated with water. Those individual associations for the colors do vary, and they also vary across cultures as well. But we can try to create sort of large categorizations of colors. And the largest one is the difference between cool colors and warm colors. Cool colors tend to have some blues in them, and warm colors have some reds or yellows. Warm colors tend to be associated with things like passion and energy and happiness. They can also have a negative association of being sort of assertive, aggressive, in your face. For example, if you're on a platform at the subway station, the line on the platform before you fall on the tracks to your doom is in yellow because it's shouting at you with color. Think of warning signs and stop signs and the like. Cool colors tend to be seen as a bit more calming, relaxed, a little bit more professional. However, they can also have negative connotations as well. They can be a little melancholy, especially bluish grays of winter can sort of be melancholy and depressing. So there are both positive and negative associations, and those associations will change wildly between cultures. What color do you wear to a funeral changes, whether it's white or black, or a range of other ones. It's important to remember that color is really difficult to pin down, but we can still try to be, at least in a broad sense, intentional about our color choices. Choosing colors, though, is really difficult. I would usually start with those individual color associations for a certain topic, but if there is no real individual color association, we can kind of go with something that sort of makes sense for the tone, whether we want to be more sort of happy and energetic or more sort of professional and serious. We can choose sort of a warm or a cool color. But how do you pair colors together? Well, color theory helps us with that. Color theory is a vast and interesting field, but I'm only going to give you the most basic version of it right now. Color theory thinks through pairings of colors and groupings of colors that sort of work together. The most common one that people start with is complementary colors. These are two colors that exist across from each other on the color wheel. So for example, this sort of greenish bluish and orangey red, those would be complementary colors. Red and green are complementary colors, although that will always look like Christmas. Blue and orange, yellow and purple. You can see a lot of complementary colors, for example, in sports teams. The two colors that they generally have are often complementary colors. Another very common mode for choosing colors is analogous colors. These are a color group that are adjacent to each other on the color wheel, especially if you want to sort of have a central color and then a bit more nuanced take on that color repeating over and over. Analogous colors may be a good choice for creating that color group. When you're using colors that you've picked out from, adopting some color theory, it's best to use them as sort of a primary color and an accent color, along with white, black, gray, and the like. Something like this, if I wanted to use that bluish and orangish color to create a custom slide design, something like this would use those colors together well. However, most people, when they're initially designing with color, don't do that. They do something like this, where they take those colors as the only ones they can or should use, and it ends up being something difficult to look at. Remember that when you're designing with color, you always have sort of black, white, gray, off-whites to work with, in addition to those colors that are going to be your main color focus for your color palette in your design language. There are many common issues that we run into when we're helping people design with color. One of the most common issues is choosing colors that don't contrast well together, so that when they put text like on top of it of a certain color, that it's hard to read. Similarly, choosing too many colors can be really overwhelming for the audience. I know that there are many people who feel that it creates a visual interest, but it only creates a visual interest in the sense that somebody has to pay more attention in order to piece together what it is you're trying to do here with color. Also, a lot of people, when they're designing with color, really stick to just sort of like the few colors that we saw on the color wheel. You should explore tints and shades in order to give nuance to your color palette. Similarly, people might choose things that are not appropriate for a given topic or content. Again, think through having some nuance to your color and making sure that those resonances sort of work out. If I need to give a presentation on the opioid epidemic in America, for example, and I choose a really bright, warm color palette, that is going to be a really hard sell. I will probably lose my audience instantly, as they will likely think that, oh, I do not understand the gravity of my own topic that I am purporting to be an expert on. So it's really important to think through those resonances. And it's also important to realize that not everybody sees color the same. So I talked before about there are cultural differences to color associations, but physically, people do not see colors the same way. 1 in 12 males has some sort of color vision issue. The most common is red-green color blindness. This means that you shouldn't be using red and green contrastively. What I mean by that is you are trying to use these two colors as the only difference between elements. So for example, if I put up a list of snakes, and one is in red and it's a list of venomous snakes, and one is in green and it's a list of completely harmless, wonderful pet snakes, and that's the only way you could tell is one is red and one is green. Well, if somebody is colorblind, they're not going to be able to tell the difference there. So having redundancy of information at the very top of the red column, put poisonous snakes. And then suddenly you are not relying on that red-green contrast as the only thing communicating that information, and you're fine. So be very careful with red-green being used as the only contrast to define information. The last thing I want to talk about that's important is working with colors digitally and understanding how to replicate colors. If you have ever worked in any sort of program and needed to pick a color, you often open up a color picker where you can sort of drag something around and find the color that you want. If you keep dragging that around and trying to find the same color, you aren't going to do it consistently, and you're going to end up actually using different colors across the board. So you need to know how colors work in digital landscapes in order to be able to use them precisely. On the digital side, colors are composed of 3 elements: RGB, red, green, and blue. This is how our computer monitors, this is how cameras, this is how pretty much everything captures the light around us. Red, green, and blue color channels. Those three together make up all of the colors that we see on our computer screen. We can manipulate those three channels, red, green, and blue, in a bunch of different ways. The two most common ones are through hex values. Hex stands for hexadecimal. It's hexadecimal because instead of having 0 to 9, which would be decimal, that's 10 digits, it has 0 to F, which is 16 sort of digits. We get 0 to 9, and then we get A, B, C, D, E, F. So that brings us up to 16 digits. The way that it works in hexadecimal is that you get a string of numbers, and each of 6 numbers, and the first 2 describe red, the second 2 describe green, and the last 2 describe blue. The other way we can compose colors digitally is through the RGB method, where we have comma-separated values of how much red, green, and blue are going to exist, are going to be put into those channels. The range of values we have there is 0 to 255. Including 0, that means we have 256 levels of red that we can put into composing this color digitally. Same with green and blue. So what does this look like? Well, if I have red, I have a really red square over there. The hex value for that, and I just put the pound sign in front here, but that's not part of it. That pound sign is often used when working with hex values, though. The pound sign, and then you'll see the red channel is the first 2 digits there, and they're FF. Remember, hexadecimal goes from 0 to 9, and then A, B, C, D, F. So FF means it is maximum red. The next 2 zeros there are for green, so there's no green in this at all. And the next 2 are blue, 00, so there's no blue in this at all. Underneath, you can see that the RGB is 255,00, meaning it has the most red that we can pump into it, and then it has no green and no blue. If we do green, you can see that those numbers just move down. So for the hexadecimal, those first 2 digits representing red are now 00, the next 2 digits representing green are FF, and the last 2 digits representing blue, 00. RGB, same thing, no red, maximum green, because remember it goes from 0 to 255, and 0 for the blue. Now, colors, however, are composed of all sorts, all bits and pieces of all of these channels together. So this is UNCG's official gold color. And you can see that it is composed by saturating the red channel. So you can see in the hexadecimal, the first 2 digits that are red are FF. Under RGB, it's 255. Having a whole lot in the green channel. So under the hexadecimal, it's B7. That's how much green there is. You can see that it is 183 in RGB out of 255. So there's quite a bit of green there. And then having just a little bit of blue, 1B in the hex number. And under RGB, you can see it's 27. Again, 27 out of 255. So it's not a ton. So max red, a lot of green, and a little blue make up that gold. It's really important to be able to work with colors in this way because we need to be precise when we are creating things digitally. If we try to pick them out of the color picker, again, we are going to be making errors and things will not look good. These numbers can be sort of confusing at first, but if you remember that everything is red, green, and blue, they can start to make sense. If you run into other categorizations or other approaches to categorizing color, such as HSL, hue, saturation, luminance, they're just different ways to sort of get at these same colors. If you open up a color picker, however, I would highly recommend that you look for either the RGB or the hex space. and use that to copy either the RGB code or the hexadecimal code in order to replicate your colors.